If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I was 15 the autumn my dad announced we were spending a long weekend in the Blue Ridge backcountry. He framed it like a rite of passage. Men's time, he called it, because my mom was working double shifts at the hospital and said she couldn't babysit two boys at once. I didn't want to go. I had a soccer scrimmage that weekend and plans with my friends, but Dad had already borrowed a co-worker's cabin and printed out maps with little handwritten notes about fishing spots and overlooks. When he brought it up at dinner, he sounded like he was selling me a car. Real forest, Mason, he said. No Wi-Fi, no screens, just trees and sky. His eyes were bright the way they got when he'd made up his mind. We left before dawn on a Friday, his pickup loaded with gear like we were joining an expedition. He handed me a thermos of coffee even though I didn't drink coffee and told me to take it in, son. I slumped against the window and watched the suburbs unravel into fields, then into low rolling hills. The farther we went, the stranger the roads became. Patchy asphalt, no shoulder, more switchbacks than straightaways. The GPS rerouted itself 3 times, then gave up. Dad laughed like it was part of the adventure. By the time we hit gravel, my stomach was a knot of unease. The road looked more like a forgotten trail than a driveway, choked by brush and branches that clawed at the sides of the truck. A buck crossed in front of us, antlers catching the dim light. It didn't hurry. It just stepped into the trees, and for a moment it seemed like the woods swallowed it whole, like water closing over a stone. The cabin sat in a shallow dip, hidden under towering oaks and white pines. No mailbox, no other driveways. The porch sagged slightly, and moss crept over the stone chimney. It wasn't the kind of place you rented online. It was the kind of place you inherited from a relative no one talked about. Inside smelled of damp wool and iron stove ash. Dad set about making it home, stacking logs, fiddling with the lanterns, humming tunelessly. I claimed the loft bed, which faced a slope dotted with saplings. Dad spread his sleeping bag below. We made soup from a can and played cards by the stove. He told me stories about camping as a kid, about how nights used to feel bigger. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. The woods out there looked too still, like a photograph. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not raccoons, not wind, not the drip of condensation. It was slow, deliberate, crunch, drag, crunch. I held my breath. The noise paused, then started again, closer. I slid from the bed and crept to the window. The trees were black silhouettes against a cloudy sky. Nothing moved. My reflection stared back at me. I told myself it was nothing and lay back down. But the sound came again, slower now, like someone testing their weight. Crunch, pause, crunch. This time I reached for my phone before remembering it had no signal. I shook Dad's shoulder. There's somebody out there. He blinked at me, groggy, then grunted, probably deer. He rolled over. I didn't sleep. Morning came hard and bright. Sunlight burned through the glass like a spotlight, and the smell of frying bacon drifted from the stove. Dad was cheerful, talking about a hike up to a hidden overlook his coworker had marked on the map. I followed him outside, still thinking about the footsteps. He was splitting wood behind the cabin when I saw the man. He stood just beyond the pile, too close to be casual. Shorter than Dad, but thick through the shoulders, with a shaved head and skin the color of parchment, like he hadn't been outdoors in months. His jacket was old military surplus, the patches faded and fraying. His hands twitched at his sides, not from cold, but like he was trying to shake off something only he could feel. Dad beamed. "Mason, this is Mr. Crow. Lives up the ridge." The man turned his head slowly, eyes pale and flat. "Good to meet you," he said, voice like gravel. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He asked where we were from, how long we were staying, whether I liked exploring. His gaze lingered a little too long. I muttered something and backed toward the porch. Dad didn't notice. He was already inviting the stranger inside for breakfast. At the table, Mr. Crow ate like a man who hadn't had a meal in days, shoveling eggs into his mouth but still asking questions. What school I went to, if I liked to hike alone, whether I'd heard of the still ones. I froze. The what? His smile widened a notch. Old story, he said. About folks who get lost up here and turn into shadows that wait for travelers. Still as trees until you notice them. Dad chuckled, called it local flavor. But the man's eyes never left me. After we ate, I slipped outside to breathe. I walked down the slope behind the cabin, crunching through frost, kicking at icy leaves. My knee clipped a rock and split open. Blood welled bright against the cold. "You're hurt," I jumped. Crow stood at the tree line like he'd grown there. He stepped forward, crouched. "Let me look. I've got a kid at my place. It's not far." Every instinct told me to say no, but his tone was casual, almost kind. I didn't want Dad thinking I was being rude. So I followed. We hiked uphill through a narrow, twisting path hemmed by dark laurel. The farther we went, the quieter it became, like sound itself thinned out. I asked how much farther. "Almost there," he said. 5 minutes later, he said it again. When we reached the cabin, my stomach turned. It wasn't a cabin so much as a carcass of one. The roof sagged. Windows were nailed shut. The porch slanted like it wanted to slide into the earth. Crooked antenna jutted from the chimney like a broken bone. "Where's your family?" I asked. "They're out walking," he said. He opened the door and motioned me in. Inside smelled of mildew layered over something sweeter and rotten. Blankets lay in heaps. Furniture was overturned. Children's clothes, tiny and stained, littered the floor. My breath steamed in the air. He led me to a chair and knelt to clean my knee. His fingers lingered a beat too long. "You've got strong legs," he murmured. "I should go," I said, no rush. He rose, blocking the doorway. "Stay for lunch." Somewhere deeper in the cabin, a hinge squealed. A door cracked open. A woman stepped out, thin as wire, her hair hanging in ropes. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, but when they found mine, her lips moved. "Help me," she whispered. Crow spun. "Back inside." She didn't move fast enough. He lunged, gripped her arm, and shoved her through the doorway. The door slammed. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He turned back to me, breathing hard. "Don't mind her," he said. "Old ghosts." His gaze flicked to my jacket. "Want to try on a different coat?" That was my moment. I bolted. I yanked the door wide and ran, branches whipping my face. My knee screamed, but I didn't stop. Behind me came the crash of boots, the snap of limbs. He shouted something I couldn't make out. The path twisted, doubled back. For a heartbeat, I thought I was lost. Then I saw the clearing through the trees. I burst out of the woods, screaming. Dad was on the porch with the axe still in his hand. He wouldn't let me leave. I sobbed. Dad didn't ask questions. He dragged me inside, locked. I was 28 the winter they sent me to the Unaka backcountry. My graduate advisor called it a real-world challenge for a botany fellow, which was her polite way of saying no one else wanted to camp for 3 weeks among burned-over plots of old forest. My job sounded simple on paper. Record plant recovery after a series of experimental fires, photograph transects, log invasive species, mark GPS points. But she didn't mention how remote the place was. The access road ended in a washed-out culvert 5 miles short of the site. From there it was on foot, switchbacks crumbling under moss, brambles snagging your clothes, ravines filled with mist even at midday. The outpost they called the station was a cabin in name only, hand-built a century ago by a logging family, then left to tilt against the mountain. No electricity, no plumbing, no cell service. A wooden latch across the inside of the door was the closest thing to a lock. When I first stepped inside, my boots sank into a film of ash and mouse droppings. The hearth leaned forward like it wanted to cough. It smelled of wet iron and cedar oil long since faded. I wasn't alone. My assigned partner was a 22-year-old ecology intern named Jules. Nervous energy bottled up in a wiry frame, constantly fiddling with his DSLR, muttering about B-roll and thumbnails. He was documenting the project for some field science vlog, which technically violated the permit, but I didn't have the stamina to be his chaperone and enforcer. He wore a tiny lapel mic even while chopping firewood. The first days were routine. We flagged transects, took soil cores, and hiked back before dark. Jules filled every silence with talk. How this footage would humanize science. How the cabin gave cabin in the woods vibes. How nothing scary ever really happened in places like this. He grinned when he said that, as if saying it made it true. But by the fourth night, the forest felt different. It wasn't the cold, our stove took the edge off. It wasn't the dark, my headlamp cut a clean circle of light. It was a pressure, a listening. I woke just after 1 to the sound of something moving outside. Not a bear's shuffle, not the scatter of raccoons. A single footfall, then stillness. Another, then stillness. As if someone was stepping from root to root, testing each one. The air in the cabin turned metallic. Jules snored below me, oblivious. I slid off the bunk and crept to the window. The old glass warped the trees into ghosts. Nothing moved. My reflection floated over the darkness, then I heard it. A breath. Low damp, the inhale of someone with water in their lungs. It came from the side of the cabin where the slope dropped away. I stood frozen until the sound faded, then climbed back into my bag and lay stiff until dawn bled through the cracks. I didn't tell Jules. I didn't want a snarky YouTube caption about ghost botanists. Instead, after breakfast, I walked the ground behind the cabin. The frost had melted just enough to reveal impressions. Broad, deep, too far apart for deer. They climbed up from the trail, ended behind the building, and went nowhere. I covered them with leaves. That night I decided to sleep in the truck, which we'd parked at the foot of an old wooden footbridge near a stand of beech trees. I cracked the window, left the keys in the ignition, and curled under my jacket. The cab felt safer. Walls, glass, and exit ready. Sometime after midnight came the crunch of gravel. Slow, deliberate. Then the squeal of a loose plank on the bridge. One step. Pause. Another. The sound circled the truck like it had all night to spend. I held my breath. Through the windshield was only darkness. Then something brushed the passenger window. Not a knock. Not a claw. A slow drag, like fingertips smeared with mud tracing a shape. My skin crawled. I flicked the headlights on. They caught only trunks and mist. No eyes, no movement. I stayed in that seat until the first smear of daylight touched the ridge. When I stepped out, the earth behind the truck was arranged into a ring of pebbles. Smooth river stones, 20 maybe, set in a perfect circle. No prints, no trail. Just the stones, damp like they'd been underwater. Jules found me staring at them. "We've got admirers," he joked. "Maybe the Hollow Watchers," I blinked at him. "What?" "Old story my grandmother told," he said, squatting to film the stones. "About shapes that squat between trees and wait for someone to call their name. You notice them, they notice you. You talk about them, they follow." He grinned at my expression. "Just folklore." I didn't answer. Over the next few nights, the steps returned. Some nights they circled. Some nights they approached straight from the woods. Once something pressed gently against the driver's door like a palm-testing glass. Each time I sat rigid, waiting for dawn. Jules began to change too. He stopped cracking jokes, kept glancing at the window while editing his footage. One morning he told me the food bags in the cabin had been torn open but nothing taken, like someone had sifted through them. His sleeping bag, stored neatly on his bunk, was soaked through. Not rain-wet, but sodden, as if dragged across a stream. The firewood we'd stacked outside was rearranged into a spiral. He still refused to leave. "If I capture whatever this is on camera, it'll go viral," he said, eyes fever bright. "No more grad loans. No more internships. People will finally watch." I hiked out the next day, following the washed-out road until my phone blinked a single bar of signal. I drove until the mountains flattened. I told myself Jules would follow. 2 weeks later, he called. His voice was thin. "Something's been folding the mirrors on my truck," he said. Like it's looking at itself. He'd installed motion cameras around the cabin. "I've got a clip. You should see it." He sent it that night. 15 seconds. The corner of the cabin, trees swaying in mist. Then movement. Something crouched low between two trunks, pale as ash. Limbs too long for its body. Its head tilted like a question. The lens shivered, static hissed. Right before the video cut out, it lifted its hand and pressed 2 fingers to its lips. I watched the clip over and over. Each time my breath came slower, heavier, like I'd inhaled whatever lived in that mist. When I closed my eyes, I could feel it crouching just outside my apartment window, patient as a shadow, waiting for me to say its name. After a school term full of fights, broken desks, and budget meetings, I was one more parent complaint away from quitting mid-semester. My doctor said my blood pressure was untenable for someone my age. I couldn't sleep. Even my dreams buzzed with fluorescent hum. So when a friend texted me about an old service road he'd used for turkey hunting, I bought a map, circled a loop, and told no one but the ranger desk I was heading in. I wanted quiet, real quiet. Not the forest bath kind with yoga mats and guided meditations, but the old kind. No reception, no traffic, no people. Just a few days to scrape the noise off my brain. I packed light. Freeze-dried meals, filters, a tarp, and a hammock. Paper map sealed in a sandwich bag. Phone switched off. The access road ended at a rusted gate with a bridge-out sign so faded it looked like a threat. Beyond was a pair of ruts sinking into the trees. From there, the hike climbed hard and kept climbing. Switchbacks narrowed into deer paths, then into tunnels of laurel where daylight leaked like thin milk. The Unicoi aren't manicured like the Smokies. They've got an older, heavier look, ridges slouching over valleys as if trying to bury them. By late afternoon, my legs shook, but the air tasted like metal and rain, and I felt more awake than I had in months. I reached a bend where a long dead fire road cut across the slope. On the map, it was marked Bald Knob Ridge FR27. In reality, it looked like a scar the forest had almost healed. I slung my hammock between two crooked hemlocks above a trickle of water that once had been a stream. Dinner was jerky and dried cherries. The sunset went copper, then violet, then black. I woke at 2 a.m. with my teeth rattling. The forecast hadn't called for cold, but frost glittered on the tarp above me. My exhale hung in the air like smoke. The ground itself felt icy, as though some buried river had risen to the surface. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Too measured for a bear. A step, then a pause, as if whoever it was listening between moves. My heart went tripwire. Hello? I tried to make it casual, like I wasn't gripping the little knife I'd kept in the hammock pouch. Trails west if you're lost. Silence. A branch cracked sharp and clean. I flicked my headlamp over the undergrowth. Nothing but black trunks and frost. No eye shine. No gear. I sat upright for nearly an hour, waiting for a grunt, a rustle, anything to pin it down. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion blunted the adrenaline and I slipped back under. Dawn burned orange through the mist. The ground where I'd heard the steps was pressed flat in long ovals, wide apart, leading up from the slope and ending behind my hammock. Nowhere else. I covered them with leaves. I broke camp fast and pushed harder than planned, skipping breaks, stripping off layers as the sun clawed the temperature back up. Sweat soaked my shirt. 6 hours ago I'd been freezing. Now I was burning. The switch made no sense. By late afternoon, I stumbled on a clearing where a metal skeleton stood like a dead insect. The remains of an old signal mast, according to a plaque half sunk in weeds. It wasn't on my map, but it gave me height. A place to feel less boxed in. I pitched early, thinking elevation might clear my head. That was when my compass began to spin. No matter how I held it, the needle rolled lazy circles. I set it on the ground, same. The air felt drained of sound, no birds, no bugs, not even wind. Like a stage set waiting for actors. Shadows stretched. My skin prickled. Around dusk, voices floated up from the trees. 2 men speaking low, calm. I stepped out from under the tarp. "Hey," I called. "Trails north if you're looking." No answer. Still the voices, close enough I should have seen someone. Then one said, clear as glass, "He's alone." Another replied, "He doesn't belong here." The hairs on my neck lifted. I backed into the tarp and wrapped my fingers round the knife. "You need to show yourselves," I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence, then slow, deliberate footsteps retreating into brush, like they wanted me to hear them leave. I didn't hesitate. I jammed gear into my pack, headlamp already on, and hiked out. No destination, just away. I reached a stone shelter miles off my itinerary and slumped inside. I didn't sleep. At 3:07 a.m., something began circling the shelter. No shape, no growl, just a crunch of leaves, 4 slow laps, each one tighter than the last. Then it stopped, not fading away, not breaking twigs, just gone. By dawn, I was done. I wanted out. I followed every blaze like it was scripture. But the signs had changed. Distances wrong, arrows pointing new ways. Forks I'd marked on the map no longer existed. The woods themselves felt rearranged. Then I reached a boulder I knew, a twin-split lichen pattern like a scar. According to the map, it should have been 10 miles back. My throat tightened. Either I'd lost hours of memory or the land had folded in on itself. I sat on a log trying to slow my breathing. That's when I saw him. 40 feet away, a man stood with his back to me. Canvas pants, suspenders, a grimy shirt stained dark across the chest. His posture was slack but deliberate, like someone posing for a daguerreotype. "Hey," I called, forcing my voice level. "Does this lead to Bald Knob Road?" He turned. His face was too smooth, like wax warmed and cooled. The eyes were penciled shapes, no depth. When he smiled, the mouth opened sideways first, a crease splitting before straightening. I bolted, dropped my pack, ran until my calves screamed. Somewhere in the panic, I stumbled onto an unmarked track flagged with old orange tape. I slid downhill, half running, half falling, until gravel crunched under my boots. An engine sputtered. A faded red truck bounced around the bend. I staggered into the road, waving both arms. The driver, a man in his 60s with a Tennessee cap, leaned out, eyebrows pinched. "You coming off the ridge?" he asked. I nodded, gasping. "Something's up there." Got turned around. He studied me a long time, eyes pale as creek water. "No one goes up there," he said finally. "Not even the animals." I climbed into the passenger seat, trembling. As we drove away, I caught our reflection in the side mirror. His face flickered. Not wrinkled and sunburned, but smooth and gray, eyes drawn on, mouth just a crease. I blinked and it was gone. He gripped the wheel, humming a tune I couldn't place. The farther we went, the colder the cab felt, as if some buried river had risen inside it. I pulled my jacket tight and stared at the trees sliding past, wondering if I'd left the ridge, or if the drowners had simply taken me somewhere new to wait. I was 31 when I finally walked away from the office job that had been grinding me down since college. The last straw wasn't even dramatic, just another manager asking if I could hop on a call real quick. After a 12-hour day, I handed in my badge, stuffed my apartment into storage, and promised myself I'd spend at least a few days alone in the mountains before figuring out what came next. The Nantahala Ridges had always drawn me more than the Smokies. They felt less curated, less photographed, like they still had secrets. I bought a faded topographic map at a gas station outside Franklin, traced a loop that looked manageable, and told myself 3 days, maybe 4, if the weather held. My car was crammed with a cheap hammock, a stove, a couple of food packs, water filters, and one battered paperback. The trailhead was empty when I pulled in. Just a ranger truck parked crooked near a bench. The ranger barely looked up from his thermos when I signed the log. He muttered, "Storms shuffle things up here," and scribbled my name without checking ID. I wasn't sure if he was warning me or just filling the air with words. The first day was perfect. The path wound through tulip, poplar, and beech wide enough for my mind to finally unclench. The air carried that faint, dry sweetness of leaves curling before frost. I set up camp 3 miles in a clearing that looked like no one had used it all year. My hammock sagged between 2 black oaks, the stove hissed, and I ate noodles watching shadows stretch like tired arms across the dirt. I woke at dawn without an alarm, sunlight bleeding through mesh, birds shaking the branches above me. The sky was pale gray but steady. My body felt loose in a way it hadn't in months. I repacked and moved east, unhurried, humming to myself. By mid-morning, something was off. The blazes painted on the trees didn't match. Yesterday, the loop had been marked with single white bars. Today, it was double slashes, fresh red paint, almost too bright. I stopped, traced one with my finger. It was tacky, not fully dried. I turned to check behind me. Every mark I passed was now red. My map showed one loop, one consistent trail. I told myself maybe a new system was being phased in. Maintenance catching up unevenly. Another half hour and I reached a spot I knew. A narrow footbridge over a shallow ravine. The kind of place you photograph without thinking. I had taken a picture here the day before, proof on my phone. Only now the bridge wasn't there. Just two moss-choked posts on either bank and a thin trickle of water below. The span of wood, the ropes gone like they'd been erased. I turned slowly, trying to map the world back onto itself. Maybe I'd crossed elsewhere. Maybe fatigue was making me misremember. But the boulder with its white lichen patch was the same. The crooked pine was the same. Only the bridge was missing. When I turned back toward the main path, I noticed something else. A wide side trail cutting off left. Yesterday it hadn't been there. It was open, beaten down, packed with recent footprints. Dozens of crisp treads like a group had passed just hours earlier. I followed, telling myself other campers must know a shortcut. 10 minutes in, I spotted trash wedged under a ledge. A crushed beer can, silver with blue stripes. I almost ignored it until I noticed the split seam on the bottom edge. The same jagged tear I'd seen near my first sight the day before. Same brand, same fold, same scar in the metal. Farther on, a wooden sign clung to a bent oak. The plank was gray, letters burned deep. Campsite 8A. The nails were rusted, the wood splintering. I checked my map twice, then my phone screenshot. Campsites ran from 7 to 9. There was no 8A. The air pressed down heavier. No birds, no insects. Just silence so thick my ears rang. Then came the sound, clicking. Not branches, not woodpeckers. A dull, deliberate ticking like fingernails tapping rhythm. The light shifted. Not darker, just flat. Colors lost their edges. The trees looked two-dimensional. The green bleached into cardboard. My skin crawled, then I heard it. A voice. Hey! Casual behind me. I spun, heart pounding. No one, again. Hey you. This time ahead, closer, too close, I should have called out. Instead, my legs moved fast, too fast. My hand brushed the multi-tool at my belt, and for half a second I froze because I couldn't remember clipping it there that morning. But it was hooked exactly where it should be. I didn't check the map, didn't check the phone, just walked hard and steady. 10 minutes later, there it was again. The same sign, Campsite 8A, same font, same nails, but nailed to a different tree, a lower one with bark like scales. And standing half hidden behind it was a figure. At first glance, human, upright, arms at sides, legs planted, but it had no face, no detail. Like a child's mannequin half finished, a suggestion of eyes, a dent where a mouth might go. It didn't breathe. It didn't sway. It was simply there, carved from stillness. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I kept my pace deliberate, as if leaving a stranger's porch. Only when the sign was out of sight did I sprint. My lungs burned. My teeth ached with the clicking. Louder now, vibrating inside my skull like a tuning fork. I ran until I hit water again. The same creek, or maybe another that wanted me to think it was the same. I followed downstream, slipping on stones, clawing through brush, and then I saw it. An iron pipe jutting from the bank, rust bleeding into the stream. I remembered photographing it yesterday. Proof again, 10 minutes more and the trees thinned. Gravel crunched underfoot. My car, the bench, the ranger with his thermos. He looked up as if no time had passed. Back already? He asked like I'd only taken a short stroll. I couldn't speak. My throat locked. I unlocked the car and drove, hands shaking so hard I almost missed the first curve. I didn't stop until I reached a diner outside Andrews. Parked crooked, engine running, door unlocked. I ordered coffee and sat staring at the glass until my hands steadied. 2 weeks later, I sent an email to the Nantahala office, asking if Campsite 8A had been recently removed or renamed. The reply was curt. There is no Campsite 8A in this sector. Let us know if you encounter vandalized signage. That should have closed it. But some nights when my apartment is quiet, I hear it again. That faint, patient clicking. Tell myself it's pipes, neighbors, anything ordinary. But part of me knows better. Because in the old stories, locals sometimes whispered. The hollow men weren't ghosts or animals. They were echoes of people who walked in circles too long, until the land itself wore their faces away. They lingered behind signs that didn't exist, waiting for someone to notice. And I noticed. I was 40 and newly divorced when I signed the papers for the cabin outside the Laurel Highlands. The realtor called it a rustic investment property. I called it a place to start over, or at least somewhere I could sit without hearing my ex-wife's voice in every corner of the house we'd gutted together. It sat at the end of a gravel lane that lost its fight with weeds years ago, perched on a slope where the trees leaned in as if they wanted to eavesdrop. From the road, it didn't scream haunted, just tired. A boxy 70s build with a sagging roofline, wood siding bleached gray, and shutters that flapped when the wind decided to test them. The seller was a man named Harlan, broad-shouldered but bent forward like someone permanently braced against weather. His wife had died years earlier, and he said he wanted flat land, sunshine, a place where the winters don't claw. He was polite, almost shy, but his eyes kept flicking to the tree line while we signed papers at the kitchen counter. When I asked if the neighbors were quiet, he gave a small laugh and said, "They keep to themselves." It sounded like a joke, but the humor didn't reach his face. Inside, the place smelled like dust baked into wood. Not foul, not rotten, just stale, like a church that hadn't been opened in months. The carpets were sun-faded, the wallpaper bubbled, the furniture long outdated. It wasn't the kind of house HGTV would glamorize, but I didn't need glamour. I needed walls that were mine. I moved in the middle of a spring storm. Sheets of rain hammered the tin roof until the whole place thrummed like a drum. My old Shepherd mix, Radar, whined in the back of the truck as I hauled boxes inside. By the time I dragged my mattress onto the living room floor, I was soaked through and too tired to care. Radar paced in circles, ears twitching, before settling by the hearth with a groan. The next morning, he was gone. Not dead, just gone. I woke to an empty blanket, leash still looped on the doorknob. I ran the property line, calling his name until my throat cracked. By afternoon, he trotted up the drive, muddy and panting, looking at me with that guilty expression dogs have when they can't explain themselves. I hugged him like a child, but unease settled low in my gut. He had never slipped a leash in his life. Over the next week, little things piled up. A hammer I'd left on the counter vanished and reappeared 2 days later on the porch rail, balanced neatly, as if displayed. A box of screws I kept in the garage turned up in the bathroom sink. The radio in the kitchen clicked on at midnight, low static hum, though I had unplugged it the day before. I chalked it up to stress, distraction, the strangeness of living alone for the first time in decades. But Radar noticed things too. He would sit rigid by the back window, staring into the trees with his ears stiff and his hackles raised. No bark, no growl, just silence, as if he was waiting for something to step closer. Some nights he padded down the hall, nails clicking, then stopped cold before the attic door. He would whine and back away. One afternoon I was patching drywall in the loft when I spilled a box of nails. They scattered across the floor in every direction. I swept them into a pile, counted them as I dropped them back into the box. 48. The next morning, I found one pressed into the wood sill of the upstairs window, perfectly vertical, as if hammered halfway in. I hadn't been in that room since the night before. I told myself it was coincidence until the voices started. The first time I was sanding a shelf when I heard my own name called from the kitchen. Clear conversational. "Evan, come here." I set down the sander and walked in, expecting to see my brother. He'd promised to drop off tools. But the kitchen was empty. No truck in the drive. Radar was asleep by the stove. The second time, it was my ex-wife's voice upstairs, sharp and irritated. "You left the light on." My chest clenched before I even thought about it. I ran up, no one. Just the lamp glowing over the hall, though I knew I had switched it off. After that, it became frequent. Sometimes my father's voice, sometimes colleagues. Once even the exact laugh of a student from years ago. Always familiar, always close. I stopped answering. The neighbors were scarce, just a scattering of cabins down the ridge. When I mentioned the noises to the man who ran the tiny general store, he just shrugged. "Sounds like the Hollow Watchers," he said, like he was naming a sports team. When I asked what he meant, he waved it off. "Old stories. They borrow voices when they get curious. Don't pay 'em mind." I laughed it off in front of him, but the words clung. The house grew more aggressive. Shutters banged in windless nights. Picture frames on the wall tilted at the same angle no matter how often I straightened them. Once I came back from town to find the crucifix that had hung above the bedroom door bent nearly sideways, though the nail hadn't shifted. Another time, every cabinet in the kitchen gaped open like mouths. I tried sage. I tried salt across the thresholds. Cheap obsidian pendants ordered online. Even whispered prayers I didn't believe. Nothing changed. The pounding began in late June. Heavy, deliberate, as if someone stomped across the attic. Then it moved. Down the walls, above the laundry, beneath the floorboards. Radar growled until his throat rasped. I shoved a dresser against the crawl space door and avoided the attic hatch altogether. Still, the house wanted to be known. A snow globe I hadn't touched in years wound itself in the middle of the night, its warped melody floating through the hall. The bathroom faucet ran full blast, though no one was near it. I woke one morning to find my late mother's necklace, the one I had boxed in storage, laid out on the nightstand. And always, the voices. Sometimes calm, sometimes mocking. Once while carrying laundry, I heard my own voice call from behind me. "You're going the wrong way." I froze so hard the basket slid from my arms. By autumn, friends stopped visiting. Too many little things happened when they came. A candle lighting on its own. Their names whispered from empty rooms. One woman swore she felt someone press cold fingers against her neck. The last night I stayed there, it was storming hard enough to rattle the glass. I lay on the mattress listening to rain pound the tin roof when Radar bolted upright and started barking into the dark. The attic door upstairs creaked open though I had jammed it shut. One by one, the lights flicked on through the house, glowing in sequence toward my room. Then the voices started together. My father's, my ex-wife's, my own. Layered, overlapping, repeating my name like a chorus. I stood, heart hammering, and shouted into the air, "What do you want?" The house went still. The lights clicked off. In the dark, something tapped once on the floorboards behind me. When I turned, Radar was pressed against the wall, ears flat. The shadow in the corner wasn't shaped like mine. It was taller, thinner, with a face smudged blank, like charcoal wiped across paper. It whispered in my exact voice, "Stay." I didn't. I grabbed Radar's collar, shoved the door open, and ran barefoot into the storm. We didn't stop until the truck's headlights cut through the rain. I didn't look back at the windows. The cabin is still there. Unsold, unclaimed. Locals say the Hollow Watchers don't like to be left alone for long. Some nights when I dream, I hear my name whispered just before waking. Not my ex-wife's voice. Not my father's, mine. I was 14 the summer my mother put me on a bus headed for the Blue Ridge foothills. She told me it was temporary, a break from the noise of lawyers and custody hearings. But I could tell she mostly wanted me out of the way while she fought my father. My Uncle Raymond, her older brother, worked as a fire lookout for the State Forestry Service. He'd been alone up in a converted tower for years, watching the ridges for smoke. I had only met him twice at funerals. He'd written in neat block letters telling me to pack warm clothes even though it was June. The tower, he said, wasn't like anywhere else. The bus dropped me in a sagging town called Chiltern's Gap, where the pavement ended in cracked concrete and kudzu. Raymond met me in an old green Jeep with a cracked windshield. He was taller than I remembered, shoulders sloping like the hills themselves. He barely spoke on the climb up the gravel switchbacks. Every few minutes he'd lean forward, scanning the trees like they might jump into the road. The farther we drove, the older the forest looked. Oak and hemlock thick as pillars, moss dragging long threads across boulders, shadows that moved even without wind. His home wasn't really a home at all. The fire tower had been built in the 1950s, a narrow metal skeleton with a square room at the top and a wraparound catwalk. Below, a small shack sat on cinder blocks, its door patched with sheet metal and chain. That's where I'd sleep. Inside smelled of oil and pine cleaner. One cot, one dresser. A single-pane window looking into nothing but trees. No TV, no cell signal, no radio except for a state-issued transceiver that croaked static when turned on. Raymond gave me a quick tour like a soldier handing off quarters. "Bathroom's an outhouse," he said. "Don't wander past the boundary markers after dark. Don't touch the lantern in the tower." He said it so flatly I almost laughed, thinking it was a joke, but his eyes didn't move from mine. "It's old," he added. "Part of the history here." Leave it be. The first few days bled together. Raymond rose before dawn, climbing the tower with a thermos to scan the horizon. I stayed below with Buck, his one-eyed shepherd mix who limped from some old injury. I kicked pine cones, read moldy paperbacks left by some other lonely ranger, and tried to imagine the court back home without me there. Nights were a different animal. The woods held their breath after sundown, a hush so heavy it felt like someone pressing a palm over your ears. Even the insects sounded muted. I lay on the cot under a thin blanket, staring at the ceiling boards while Buck snored like a saw at the foot of the bed. The first time I saw her, I thought I was dreaming. It was just after midnight. I'd woken to the smell of damp metal like old coins. The window beside my cot glowed faintly. Not moonlight, but a softer, bluish pulse like a lantern behind frosted glass. She was standing at the tree line about 20 yards out, where the ferns gave way to the slope. She didn't step forward, didn't sway, just stood there holding something close to her chest. From that distance, I couldn't tell if it was a bundle or a lantern, only that its light spilled up into her face. She wore a pale dress, simple, sleeveless, the kind my grandmother had in old photographs. Her hair was pinned under a dark scarf. Her eyes, if they were eyes, caught the light like water at dusk. No reflection, only depth. I pushed myself up on an elbow, heart hammering, but not from fear, more from confusion. Buck didn't move. His one eye was open, staring at her too, but his body stayed slack. I whispered his name. He whimpered but didn't bark. Then she turned slightly, and I saw the object in her arms was not a lantern but a swaddled child. She rocked it once, twice. The motion was slow, deliberate. My skin prickled as if the air had thinned. I blinked and she was gone, the glow fading back into the trees like breath on glass. I didn't tell Raymond. Something about his warning not to touch the tower lantern glued my tongue. But I began to watch for her. Every night at the same hour, I woke as though someone had knocked quietly inside my head. Sometimes she appeared at the base of the tower instead of the tree line, looking up as though measuring the climb. Always the bundle, always the rocking. A few nights she lifted her gaze to mine and something in my chest would seize, a mix of guilt and recognition I couldn't name. It was on the 6th night that I realized she wasn't alone. Coming back from the outhouse, flashlight trembling in my hand, I caught movement along the gravel path. Thin shapes like shadows that had lost their owners. They glided between trees, crossing without sound, their outlines human but stretched, jointed wrong. Some drifted too high off the ground, others with arms hanging like wet rope. I killed the flashlight on instinct and held my breath. They moved in a slow procession toward the tower, as if circling an invisible center. When my breath finally escaped, it came out as a sharp gasp. Instantly, every shape stopped. Dozens of dark heads tilted as one toward me. No eyes, only the sense of being pinned under 1,000 small weights. My knees locked. The flashlight slid from my palm and clattered onto the stones. The sound cracked the night like a bone. Then, just as suddenly, they melted back into the trees, fading as if the darkness itself had swallowed them. I stumbled into the shack, slammed the door, pressed my back against the wood. Buck stood stiff-legged by the cot, hackles raised, a low rumble in his throat. That was the first night I kept the transceiver turned on. Static filling the room until dawn. After that, patterns emerged. The shapes drifted whenever the woman appeared. If I stayed quiet and still, they ignored me. A black tide flowing past without notice. If I shifted, they hesitated but did not stop. Raymond seemed unaware. He never came down at night. He ate with me at dawn, handed me chores, and said nothing about my pale face or sleepless eyes. One morning, curiosity snapped me. While he brewed coffee upstairs, I crept into the tower past the "Do Not Enter" sign. The air smelled like dust and ozone. At the center of the room sat an iron lantern on a low table, its glass cloudy with age. Inside, instead of a wick, a small swirl of pale blue light turned like a slow whirlpool. It pulsed once when I got close, like it recognized me. On the inside of the glass, someone had scratched a name I couldn't fully read. Maribel, maybe. Or Marlin. My reflection looked wrong in the glass, stretched long and thin. Raymond's voice snapped behind me. "I told you not to touch it." He was angrier than I'd ever seen him, knuckles white around his coffee mug. This isn't a toy. This ridge has its stories. You don't want them noticing you. He ushered me back down, face pale. He wouldn't say more, only muttered about Lantern Mother and miners gone missing in 37. That night, the woman appeared closer than ever, at the foot of the shack's steps. She no longer looked serene. Her arms clutched the bundle tight, her mouth a hard line. The glow from the bundle leaked out like mist, curling along the ground toward the shack. The dark shapes gathered in a ring behind her, motionless. I don't know what compelled me, but I opened the door and stepped out. The air was ice pressing into my lungs. Buck barked once and then fell silent. My bare feet crunched gravel. She raised her head. Her eyes, deep, endless, fixed on me. And for the first time I heard something. Not a lullaby, but a single word, stretched thin like a wire pulled taut. Home. I descended the steps. The shapes parted to make a path. My heart should have been slamming, but it wasn't. I felt calm, weightless. She turned, walking toward the tower, beckoning with a tilt of her chin. I followed. The figures closed behind us, a living corridor. When we reached the base of the tower, she vanished, leaving only the faint scent of iron and rain. The door to the tower stood open, though I knew Raymond locked it each night. Inside, the lantern blazed, blue-white light filling the room like dawn underwater. The shapes crowded at the windows but did not cross the threshold. My hand rose on its own. I touched the glass. It was colder than stone and yet pulsing like a heartbeat. In that instant, I saw not her, but dozens. Women, men, children, faces lit by the same glow, descending into some mine shaft that swallowed them whole. The bundle she carried was no child at all, but a miner's lamp wrapped in cloth. The last light of the buried. They weren't ghosts in the usual sense. They were something unfinished, a memory feeding on watchers, and I had watched too long. A hand gripped my shoulder. Raymond. His eyes were wet, his jaw clenched. "Let it go," he said, voice shaking. He yanked me back from the lantern. The light flickered, then dimmed to a single thread before going out entirely. The shapes at the windows dissolved like smoke. I woke on the cot at dawn, head pounding. Buck lay at my feet, breathing slow. The transceiver hissed softly. The tower door was shut. Raymond sat at the table, staring at his hands. He didn't ask what I'd seen. I didn't tell him. The woman never returned. The shapes stopped circling. Nights became only nights again. Yet sometimes, while walking the gravel path to the outhouse, I'd smell that damp metal scent and feel the forest pause, as if holding a breath it couldn't release. I wasn't supposed to stay more than a week. My brother Caleb had invited me up only because he needed help with the baby, while he finished repairing the well pump. He'd moved into that crooked old homestead outside Blackwater Ridge a few months before, after leaving his job in Richmond. "It's quiet," he'd promised on the phone. "Good air, good water. Just you, me, and the woods." I said yes because my lease had ended, and I was tired of the city's sirens bleeding through the windows. Finding the place felt like driving off the map, past a clapboard post office, past a shuttered bar with its sign falling into weeds. The blacktop dissolved into gravel. Then the gravel narrowed into two dirt ruts lined with ironweed. No cell service, no other houses, just mile after mile of trees closing in like slow water. By the time the road ended at a sagging gate, dusk had pooled in the hollows and my rental car looked out of place, shiny and weak among the pines. Caleb was waiting on the porch, hair tied back, his little girl balanced on his hip. He'd lost weight since I'd seen him last, face thinner but calmer. The house behind him slouched into the slope as if trying to hide. Built in the 1930s for loggers, he told me. Bought at a foreclosure auction for the price of a used truck. It had a tin roof patched with mismatched sheets, sagging beams, and a screened porch that ran along the back like a whisper. "It's rough," he admitted, "but it's ours." Inside smelled of wood smoke and old pine cleaner. The rooms were small and uneven. My room was at the top of a narrow staircase, a former storage loft Caleb had hastily cleared. The bed was a box spring with a thin mattress. The window looked down into a tangle of rhododendron. At night, the woods pressed so close it felt like someone leaning against the glass. The first few days passed easily enough. I helped feed the baby, hung laundry on the sagging line, tried to get used to nights without traffic noise. The silence here had its own weight. Even the birds seemed to land softly. Caleb spent hours clearing brush from an old switchback trail that led down to a creek. He wanted to make it safe to run on, said it was his therapy. I noticed odd things but brushed them off. A soft creak of boards on the back porch when no one was there. The baby turning her head toward the wall, eyes following something I couldn't see. Drafts that came and went without wind. It was an old house, I told myself. Old houses groan. It was on the fourth evening after Caleb had gone down to the creek for water that I first heard the steps. I was upstairs lying on the mattress reading by lantern light. Below, the boards whispered, 1, 2, 3. Pause. Then 3 more, measured like someone climbing the porch stairs. The baby was asleep in the next room. I froze, listening. No knock, no voice. Just the subtle weight of someone at the door. I crept to the window. The yard was empty, moonlight glazing the overgrown path. But the boards creaked again right at the threshold. My breath felt thick. Then nothing. Silence returned, heavy as wet wool. When Caleb came back 10 minutes later, sweat darkening his shirt, I asked if he'd forgotten something and doubled back. He frowned. No, why? I said it was nothing, but my hands shook pouring tea. The next morning he admitted he'd felt watched on the switchback trail. I stopped, he said, and it stopped. I jogged and it jogged, but there wasn't anyone there. He tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. We joked about deer, echoes, weird mountain acoustics. Neither of us believed it. We'd both grown up around woods. We knew how animals moved. This was not that. After that, nights grew stranger. Soft pacing on the back porch. A shadow moving along the hall just as you turned your head. Always just far enough away you couldn't be sure. We started leaving a lamp on in the kitchen, but it only carved deeper shadows. One night, near 2 a.m., I was downstairs in the rocker with the baby asleep against my shoulder. The fire had burned down to orange veins. Upstairs, directly over my head, came footsteps. Not the random pop of old wood, but full pacing. Heel to toe, back and forth. My eyes went to the ceiling. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Then a sound like water rushing through pipes, though we had none upstairs. Caleb appeared halfway down the stairs, hair mussed. Did you call me? He asked. I whispered no. Were you in the office? He asked. My mouth went dry. I'm down here, I said. We stared at each other across the dim room. Neither of us went up. After that, I stopped using the rocker at night. I slept on the floor beside the crib, clutching the baby's quilt like a talisman. Still, the footsteps came, sometimes above, sometimes just outside the window, sometimes 3 heavy knocks at the door. Always silence when we opened it. When our mother drove up from Illinois for a visit, we thought the extra body would change the mood. She'd barely put her bags down when she offered to watch the baby, so Caleb and I could get dinner in town. We were gone barely 2 hours. When we pulled back into the drive, she was standing in the gravel holding the baby like a shield. Eyes huge. I don't want to scare you, she said quietly. But someone tried to come in. She told us she'd been by the front window when she heard the steps. Heavy, deliberate, up the porch stairs. Then 3 bangs at the door, angry, not neighborly. She flung it open. Nothing there. Not even crickets. Just dead stillness pressing against her ears. She refused to sleep there another night. After she left, the baby began doing something new. She'd stand in the corner of her little room, ear to the wall, whispering. Sometimes giggling, sometimes nodding. When I asked who she was talking to, she said matter-of-factly, "The lady in the boards. She tells me where the stairs go." My chest tightened. I forced a smile. "That's funny," I said. She frowned. "She says you don't believe me." Later, during dinner, she piped up again. "I saw Grandpa yesterday." We thought she meant our father, who'd visited recently. But when we asked which grandpa, she said, "My other grandpa. He's got long hair and feathers. He flies." Caleb's fork paused midair. Our father has short hair. His ex's father, her other grandpa, died before she was born. The only photo of him is in storage. That night, Caleb sat on the porch staring into the tree line long after the baby was asleep. His face looked older than our father's. I started digging. The local library was just a single room above the old post office. The librarian, A bent woman with clouded eyes perked up when I mentioned the homestead. "Oh, that place," she said. "That's the old Boylan tract. Folks call it Widow's Bend. She lost her husband on the Switchback Trail in '47. They say she never left. She walks at night counting steps. Whispers through the boards to any child who'll listen. Switchback Widow, they call her. Don't look at her if she looks back." She chuckled like it was a campfire story. My skin crawled. I didn't tell Caleb. What good would it do? But that night the knocks came again, louder. The baby cried in her sleep. We huddled in the kitchen with every light on. When silence returned, it was worse than the noise. 2 nights later, I woke to find the baby gone from her crib. My heart seized. I bolted down the hall and saw the front door open, screen swinging. Outside, pale light pooled at the bottom of the porch steps. The baby stood there in her footy pajamas, looking up. At the edge of the yard stood the woman from the librarian's story. Thin, draped in a faded dress, hair hidden by a scarf, face too pale for night. She held out one long hand, palm up. I grabbed the baby, stumbling backward. The woman tilted her head. Her eyes were dark but bottomless, like knots in old wood. She whispered something I couldn't hear but felt inside my skull. A pressure of words. The baby reached toward her, fingers splayed. Then the woman stepped backward and dissolved into the trees, leaving only the sound of distant steps counting down. After that, Caleb boarded the upstairs windows and refused to use the Switchback Trail. But it didn't matter. The house had already shifted. Drafts moved like fingers along the walls. The baby spoke less but stared more. At night I'd wake to find her standing by the window, face expressionless, lips moving soundlessly. On my last night there, I dreamed of the Switchback Trail. But in the dream it ran straight into the sky, each step glowing blue. At the top stood the woman, not old but young, holding not a child but a lantern. She lifted it and I saw my own reflection inside, stretched and thin. I woke before dawn, sweat cold on my neck. The house was silent. The baby slept in her crib. Caleb snored on the couch. Everything normal, but not. I packed quietly and left before sunrise, driving the rutted road without looking back. I've never returned to Blackwater Ridge. Caleb still lives there, though his calls have grown shorter. He says the baby, now almost 5, spends hours drawing staircases and women without faces. He laughs like it's a phase. I try to believe him, but sometimes alone in my apartment I catch myself counting steps under my breath. 4, then 3. Pause, just like the porch that night, and I wonder if I really left, or if some part of me is still walking that switchback, climbing toward a woman who never stopped waiting. My aunt and uncle had been living in that crooked mountain house outside Spruce Lick for only a few months when they invited me to visit. It was supposed to be a change of scene, a week away from the suburb where my senior year had been limping along. I told myself it would be a free place to crash, a chance to sketch in peace. They framed it as family time and fresh air. The house sat at the end of a rutted loop off a logging road, far enough into the Alleghanies that GPS gave up 3 turns back. No cell towers, no other houses. At night, the treetops seemed to lean inward until there was no sky at all, only black needles and the faint smell of damp rock. The porch wrapped around like a belt someone had forgotten to buckle, with a lopsided swing that groaned if you brushed it. Inside was warmer, but still felt temporary. Mismatched chairs, a wood stove that smoked more than it heated, and those high hunting blind windows that let you feel watched instead of safe. My uncle had gone full unplug. He worked odd shifts at a ranger station and spent off days hauling brush, fixing things. My aunt, who'd left her office job, had thrown herself into old-time crafts, quilting, dyeing, spinning like she could stitch a new life from scraps. They like to say Spruce Lick was quiet. To me it felt like a paused movie. Even the birds called low and brief. It was my second morning there, when my aunt read aloud from a local newsletter she'd picked up at the tiny library. Most of it was church suppers and seed exchanges, but one ad made her eyes brighten. A heritage textile barn, down by the abandoned depot, specializing in mountain weaving traditions. She clasped her hands like she'd just uncovered treasure. "Let's go," she said. "I've been dying to see it." My uncle agreed to drive, but made it clear he'd rather nap in the truck. We bounced down back roads under a washed-out sky until the pines gave way to rusted track and cinder piles. The barn looked less like a shop than a long storage hall tacked onto an old freight building. Its siding faded to the color of bone. No real sign, just squares of cloth pinned to the windows like insulation. A cracked Coke machine slumped against the wall, coin slot taped over. My uncle killed the engine. "I'll be here," he said, cracking the window and pulling out a dog-eared hunting catalog. Inside, the air smelled like sun-baked wood and old linen. Narrow planks ran the length of the hall, bowing underfoot. Bolts of fabric stood in regimented rows taller than I was, making corridors that twisted out of sight. Dust motes drifted in the dim light. Somewhere deeper in, I heard a loom clack once and stop. My aunt drifted toward a cluster of indigo prints near the back, already humming, fingertips trailing patterns like she was counting them. I hung near the entrance, leafing through a bin of scraps. Most were dull, but one caught me. A strip of deep crimson shot through with a glinting silver thread. It looked like a cape a comic book kid might wear. I held it up squinting, imagining how I'd sketch it. "You like stories about heroes?" a voice asked. Not from the doorway, not from behind a counter. Right behind me. I turned and a man stood at the far edge of the remnant table. Windbreaker zipped to the chin. Khaki trousers pressed crisp, hair parted too neatly. He could have been anyone, teacher, insurance agent. But something about him was off, like a photo with the color balance wrong. His smile held but didn't reach anywhere. "Vacationer?" he asked, tone smooth but stretched thin. I didn't answer. My fingers still pressed the red cloth, now stiff at the edges. He stepped sideways, mirroring me as I edged back. The aisle was narrow. We couldn't pass without brushing. "I've got something you'd like," he said. "Come look." He started walking around the table. I moved left. He moved faster, cutting the gap. The air felt thin, stale, like the building had sealed itself. The clack of the loom didn't return. My aunt's humming was gone too, swallowed by fabric towers. "Come here," he said again. His voice had lost its friendly veneer, just flat insistence. He reached into his jacket with a flick of the wrist. Not big, but practiced. Something dark hung from his belt under the coat. Strap cord, I couldn't tell. My chest cinched tight, I bolted right. He stepped fast, blocking me. I spun left, faking out. He matched me perfectly. Not reacting, but performing, like a dance he'd rehearsed. The coat flared, and for a flash I thought of the stories my aunt had told the night before. About the tally man of Spruce Lick. Some old mountain tale about a surveyor who measured children instead of land. She'd laughed, but the hair on my arms rose remembering it. I shouted. The sound echoed strange, caught by cloth and wood, bouncing like it was inside a barrel. The man froze, shoulders rolled back, hands lifted slightly, palms out. His face rearranged itself into something bland. "Just kidding," he called, louder as if to an audience. My aunt burst around the corner holding a wooden yardstick like a spear. I'd seen her measure fabric with it 100 times. I'd never seen her grip it that hard. She stepped between us, eyes locked on him. She didn't speak. He nodded an almost theatrical nod and walked out. Not hurried. Not ashamed. Just gone. The clerk emerged from a back room seconds later carrying a roll of elastic, looking puzzled. My aunt didn't explain. She grabbed my arm and led me out, the yardstick still in her fist. We didn't talk until the truck had rattled a mile from the depot. My hands shook so badly I couldn't buckle my seatbelt. When I told her what he'd said, how he'd moved, how close he'd gotten, she didn't say maybe it was a misunderstanding. She just whispered, "You did right. Don't ever follow someone who tries to measure you." That night back at the house, the silence felt heavier. I lay awake in the loft, listening to the woods press against the windows. In the dark, I thought I heard soft counting. 1, 2, 3, pause. Like someone marking inches on invisible cloth. I told myself it was wind in the rafters. But the next morning, when I opened my sketchbook, the red scrap was gone from my pocket. In its place was a sliver of chalk, the kind tailors use to draw cutting lines, with a number scrawled I didn't recognize. I left Spruce Lick the following day. My aunt waved from the porch but didn't smile. She never mentioned the weaving barn again. My uncle said the textile place had shut down for renovations 2 weeks later. Back in my own room, months passed. Yet sometimes, flipping through my notebook, I'll find faint white marks along the margins, as if someone's been measuring me in my sleep. 4 short strokes, then 3. Pause. I tell myself it's nothing, just graphite smudges. But at night, when the house is quiet and the air feels thin, I can almost hear the loom clack once in the distance and stop. When I signed the contract that summer, I thought of it as a paycheck with a view. Seasonal work for the State Forestry Service, clearing trails, hauling debris, checking signage. Wasn't glamorous, but it paid more than the coffee shop back home. And after 2 aimless semesters of college, I figured I could use the solitude to sort myself out. My supervisor, a leathery man named Dorn, handed me a packet of assignments and said, "Stay out of Cheat Hollow if you can help it. The maps are wrong, and the trails half forgotten." That made me want to see it more. Most mornings I parked my rusting pickup in gravel turnouts, the truck alone in a sea of green. I'd sling the chainsaw over my back, clip a hatchet to my belt, and hike into the hills with the smell of gasoline and pine needles thick in the air. The radio clipped to my pack was supposed to keep me in touch with the ranger station, but unless I was on a ridgeline yelling into the clear, it was dead weight. That was fine by me. I liked the quiet. Cheat Mountain carried its own kind of hush. A damp, muffled silence where even crows seemed to think twice about calling. The first 2 trails in my packet were routine. Eroded switchbacks, a couple of fallen hemlocks, nothing unusual. The third was listed as Old Way Spur. On the topo, it looked like an afterthought. A faint thread curling off the main loop and then vanishing into nothing. No campsites, no loops, just an end. I drove out early on a Tuesday. Rain still dripping from the night storm. The air was heavy, my boots sinking in mud as I started down the spur. Right away it felt different. Most trails carried signs of life, boot prints, deer scat, even plastic bottles someone dropped. Here, nothing. Just mats of wet leaves and brambles thick across the path, like the forest had decided to take it back. A mile in, I found the first obstacle. An oak had toppled across the switchback, roots yanked from the slope like bones. I set down the pack, checked the chain, and fired up the saw. The engine roared, rattling the quiet. Chips flew. I was halfway through the cut when something stopped me. A sound so faint it took a second to register. Not a bird call, not wind. A whistle. It was neat, deliberate, carrying 8 or 9 notes. The kind of tune a person hums when they're fixing a fence. It floated down from the slope above me, too controlled to be natural. I killed the saw, my ears ringing in the sudden silence. Nothing moved. No twigs snapping, no startled squirrel. Just the echo of that last note hanging on the wet air. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded small. No answer. Then 10 seconds later, the whistle began again. Same tune, same pace, each note too precise. Halfway through, it stopped mid-phrase, cut off like a radio losing signal. That wrongness, sharp cold, ran down my back. I told myself it was another worker, maybe a hiker, but the stillness after didn't add up. I waited, hatchet heavy on my belt, before forcing myself back to the trunk. I cleared it faster than usual, eager to move on. The second blowdown was a pine collapsed across the trail, branches rotting into mulch. I set the saw down to brace it. That's when I heard it again. A crunch in the underbrush uphill, slow, careful, leaves shifting under measured steps. I held my breath, every muscle locked. Then the whistle returned. Same notes, closer this time. I didn't call out. I just stood listening, hand wrapped around the hatchet. The slope was steep, littered with roots and rocks. No one should have been able to move that smoothly, unseen. The whistle trailed off mid-note again, as if it knew I was listening. My lungs ached before I realized I'd stopped breathing. I abandoned the cut, left the saw there, pack and all, and started walking fast down the spur. My boots hit mud hard. I kept quiet, not wanting to provoke whatever was shadowing me. That's when I saw the footprints. In a patch of soft soil just off trail, a set of shoe prints pressed sharp into the earth. Not mine, too small, maybe size 9 while I wore a 12. The treads were fresh, edges wet, as if made minutes before. They pointed toward the way I had just come from. I followed them a few steps into the brush. They stopped dead, not faded, not trailed off. Just ended like the person had stepped once more and vanished. Grass unbent, no broken twigs. Nothing. A twig cracked 20 feet downslope. The whistle answered, faint but clear. Panic burned hot in my chest. I turned and half-jogged, pushing through brush, ducking branches that clawed at my face. Sweat slicked my back, though the air was cool. Every few moments the whistle picked up behind me. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther. Always the same cheerfulness. Always stopping mid-note. When the truck finally shimmered through the trees, sunlight catching its windshield, I sprinted. Gravel scattered under my boots as I slammed the door and locked it. My hands shook fumbling the keys. The engine caught, and I tore down the loop without looking back. At the ranger station, I handed Dorn the map with shaking hands. Trails flagged but unfinished, I said. "What's the matter with it?" he asked. "Something's wrong there," I managed. "I'm not going back." He studied me a long moment, face unreadable. Then he said, "You heard him, didn't you?" My throat tightened. "The Lark Man," Dorn went on. "That's what folks around Cheat call him. Used to be a trail hand out there back before my time. Whistled all day, said it kept him steady. Then he walked off one spur and didn't come back. Search dogs lost the scent like he'd stepped into the air. They say he still whistles, trying to lead others off the path. If you hear him finish the tune, it means he's close enough to touch." I didn't reply. I drove home that night, left the saw in the pine where I'd dropped it. Weeks passed. I quit the contract early. Picked up shifts washing dishes instead. I told myself I'd forget. But some mornings I catch myself whistling while tying my boots. 8 or 9 notes, slow and deliberate. Before realizing I've never learned the tune. Not really. And when I stop halfway through, the silence that follows feels too heavy. Like someone else is waiting for me to finish.